Good afternoon, everyone. We're here on the fourth Yahrtzeit of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, and the 412th day of the war, a war that I feel relieved he did not see. Rabbi Sacks was the chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth for 22 years, from 1991 to 2013. King Charles said of him, he was a light to the nations. Tony Blair said he was an intellectual giant. He was a philosopher, an author, a moral voice of a generation, a prophetic voice. But for the two of us, he was our teacher. I'm delighted to be here with a friend and colleague, Rabbi Dr. Raphael Zarum, who was a finalist in the Rabbi Sacks Book Prize for his book, Questioning Belief, and hopefully you'll tell us a little bit about that, Rafi. He is the Dean of the London School of Jewish Studies, and he holds the Rabbi Sacks Chair in Contemporary Judaism.
Yeah.
And thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Coming from London, we have arranged English weather for this year.
Thank you.
It's raining and gray, but hopefully our conversation will bring in some light. So let's go to that day when you found out that Rabbi Sacks died.
So in England, in London, it was Motzei Shabbat.
Yes.
So we just literally heard about the results of the American elections, which my daughter was quite excited about. And then a half an hour later, a friend phoned and told me what happened.
Mm.
And all of us were just, cold for like half an hour just sitting there. And then I realized I've got to go into action. And actually, that's his voice in me. You've got to go into action. And the Jewish Chronicle, the newspaper, contacted me about writing an article. And so I wrote with tears in my eyes, and you just get on and do something. And actually, for me, it was quite cathartic to react and talk about it. Mm. And I'd always felt, I didn't quote him all the time when he was alive. He encouraged me to do my own Torah. Mm. And occasionally I'd mention things. But after he passed away, he couldn't speak for himself. And his Talmidim, who knew his Torah from the beginning, I felt responsibility to share and to talk his Torah. And I've been doing it ever since.
Mm. Yeah, I think about that moment because it was, we were here and experiencing the elections. We only found out secondhand because it was Shabbat. And I remember very similarly that sort of chaotic evening being really flattened by the news. And then thinking, I can't believe he's died now. I need him. I need him to explain the world to me. Because we knew that the election was so polarizing, and his was this sort of prophetic voice that I always relied on. And I will say that for many, many months after he died, I would randomly start crying. I'd be at a red light. I'd be driving somewhere. A friend would come over who was English, and it would just all start again. And it does now. Yeah, it does now. But I remember the makad, like the real pain of it. And I just want to give a shout out to Rabbi Moshe Hauer from the OU, runs the OU, because he reached out to me, and we had a forum not long after, which I was privileged to speak at, and it was very, very emotional for me. I just had a lot of tremulousness in my voice, and every time I taught about him, it was hard to contain myself. But he had called me and he spoke about losing his own Rabbi, and it is something foundational that seems to drop in those moments.
Absolutely, and I've yet to avoid talking that Ross Soloveitchik wrote about this, that you are an Avel if you're immediate family, but anyone who feels a great loss is an Avelut. It's only happened once before to me when my friend Mark Weinberg passed away. But in a sense, we were an Avelut, and I felt the need to share, and that people didn't. I used to always contact Rabbi Sacks' office when someone had died who he knew or was important, so that his office knew about it.
Right.
And I felt responsibility. So on Facebook, anytime anyone wrote a piece, I shared it. So I was sharing 100, and people were listening, following mine to see. They wanted to read more, so I felt there's a technical issue here, so share it. So I just shared everything so people could read and learn about it, and it was a community in mourning.
Yeah, community mourning. It's still in mourning. I think in certain ways we need his voice even more today. He died during COVID, and watching that funeral, I'm sure that you watched it as well, and it was it was gray and lonely and
yeah,
feeling that this
yeah.
was not the funeral that this man,
Right.
this guy.
But in a way, it's
deserved.
the ultimate anavut also
Yes.
to not be on there.
Yes.
And it's a line from a song, but people said no one can fill his shoes, and I put a line from something else, but I always felt that he would want us to fill our own shoes.
Yes.
That's how I look at it, right? It's like you fill your shoes, you do your Torah.
Yeah, I think
It's very fundamental to me.
Let's talk about both of us being students. I think most people in the world know Rabbi Sacks through his writings. Some of them have never actually met Rabbi Sacks or heard him teach. They didn't see that magic. I actually got graded by Rabbi Sacks because he was my. I took a master's with him, and he was the reader of my dissertation. So, tell me when you first encountered Rabbi Sacks.
Actually, I was 13 years old.
Mm.
He was the Sir Emanuel Jacobitz lecturer at Jews College, and he gave a series of public lectures. And my father said, my other said to me, "This is a man we need to go here." I remember what he said. I actually remember what he said because it was such. I never heard someone do that kind of thing. He was talking about the size of the community, and Robin Dunbar, this I think psychologist, had just written a paper called about the Dunbar number, which is the amount of people you can get to know well.
Yeah.
So Sacks quotes this, and I'm like, "What's a rabbi quoting academic papers for?" I was like, "Oh," and he said it. The maximum size of the community is the amount that the rabbi can get to know well, and then they need another rabbi. And I sat there, I remember that I was like, I need to learn from this man because he understands Torah thought, but also contemporary ideas. He was weaving them together from day one. And that made sense. Not just quoting often sermons have I read a piece of research that says what I want to say anyway. No, really engaging with these ideas and seeing the two go together. And that made sense psychologically to me. So from then on, I followed and I would learn from him and try and find any effort to get his Torah. And actually, when you're a teenage kid, you can't. So one time I could, as your Matzmut in the big synagogue, there was very long choirs, and he would occasionally get a bit bored, I think. So I would put things I wanted him to read and things that I wrote just before, right? So next time, run up, put it there on his stender, then sit down. And then he comes in, and the davening goes on, and then he looks and he goes, and he starts reading it. I'm like, yes. So
that was good strategy.
Yeah, I wanted to connect, but he was very gracious for young people who are excited. He would take time with us and inspire us.
And how old were you when you?
So that first time was 13, 14, and then all the way through. Going on. And then I worked for B'nai Akiva the year he became chief rabbi. And so there was obligations. I was the madrif to two of his children. And so we always had the connections. And like people who experienced Harry Potter when the books came out and read them. So as Rabbi Sacks' books came out, I read them. I think my mum was on the Zoom here and she brought me his first book when of my birthday, and then he was gracious. For every birthday, he wrote a book for me. Really nice of him.
That's very nice of him.
Every year, and so I could read. I went to the book launches, so I watched the philosophy and the thought grow, and it was the grounding for us. With his Talmudim in that most general sense, we all read the books. We all thought what he was thinking about, and that's what it was.
How
was it for you with those?
Yeah, and as I came to London when I was 21. I was very newly married. We lived on Victoria Road, and Jews College was on Albert.
And you taught on Sunday mornings. I
ran the sixth form center.
I was it.
Yeah, and you were one of our outstanding Talmidim, our outstanding students. But so Jews College is small. It was, and it could, it's a small building, and it was very close to my home, and I didn't drive. Right. So and my husband was a medical student. I just spent all day there. I came to London. I was doing a master's in philosophy at King's College, and I was very disappointed in the studies.
Really?
And I switched to religious education in the Institute of Education. But I started working in the college. I started teaching on a program run by Hebrew University for senior educators. Right. And I did that for 2 years, and then. In the context of that, I was meeting with a lot of.
I'm sorry. People are having a hard time understanding with your accent. And,
okay.
You face the camera.
I need to
bit slower.
I need to speak more slowly. I apologize, everybody.
Thank you. These are Americans. They might not understand.
Separated by a common language. I apologize, and I will try and speak more clearly.
I guess we'll speak into that. We're so excited to be in conversation with each other about this. I don't think we've actually ever really, processed this loss together. Anyway, I being in the college all the time, and also Rabbi, he was the dean at that time. He was the principal of Jews College, and, starting to go to lectures that he would give or interacting with him. And I was hired to run the Sixth Form Center, which is the equivalent of juniors and seniors in private independent high schools would come to study on Sunday mornings with me. And Rabbi Sacks, sometimes I'd have an outstanding student, I'd say, I'd like to introduce you to Rabbi Sacks. Or a student would have a question, I'd say, let's ask Rabbi Sacks. And Rabbi Sacks, as you know, he was so interested in young people. We ran a number of Shabbatonim in Bournemouth, a resort town on the sea. We ran for young professionals, but also for young people. And he would go to universities regularly and speak, Cambridge and Oxford. And
I have to tell you, there's a photo of him speaking in Birmingham Jewish Society. And there's only about
the Jewish Society is like
Hillel. And there's only 9, he's chief rabbi, there's 9 people in the audience. 4 of them today are rabbis.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And sometimes those small groups, that's what if you invest and you care, it can make a dramatic difference.
A dramatic difference. And I don't think he saw it as a quantity thing. I think he saw it as a quality thing. I just met yesterday with Rabbi Alex Israel. He was one of those 16-year-olds who I introduced to Rabbi Sacks. And I think in some way, intelligent, interested students who saw him meld these worlds of philosophy and sociology and the intellectual depth that he brought from his own education and just poured it into Torah. And it inspired a generation of young people like ourselves to say, I can't be him, but I'd like to sit in those shoes. I'd like to do what he.
I like I think to follow that path, absolutely. Everything with Torah, everything, there's no limit.
Yeah.
Everything everywhere all at once.
Yeah, and I actually I've come to observations. We're going to talk a little bit about legacy. But one of the things that I don't know why it wasn't apparent to me when he was alive, given also an avid reader of his books as they came out. I think I recognize now that his general shita, his general approach to Judaism was that Judaism is the solution to every problem. So, there's a problem in modern society, and I'm going to bring the wealth of what I know in the world of Torah and the wealth of what I know in other disciplines and show you why Judaism has an answer.
Is it the solution or has something to say that's helpful?
I think in certain, agreed, helpful, but I think in certain domains, the seminal role of the family.
Yes.
And
how to structure society.
Yeah, how to structure society. I think the covenantal nature of the commitments that we make. I think he did see, and I've been observing this from a different perspective as I've aged, which is this in some way because he came to Judaism later, and it was a solution for him. And because he found it later, he didn't take it for granted.
Yeah.
He just was so full of wonder. You look at a letter in the scroll and why he's Jewish, which for me, this was a very influential book, not only as a reader, but also as a teacher who passes it on to students. The sense that he found in Judaism this great intellectual repository, and he just wanted to share it with everyone.
I think you're right. But as you said, because he came later, he absorbed knowledge from the world and valued it to its core.
Yeah.
But as truth, if it could be verified and important. And therefore it had to overlap with Judaism, and there had to be a response, a solution to how this would work.
Yeah.
And I think he was challenged by a lot of these questions himself. He grappled with them. And that's why he found a path that made sense.
Yeah.
And then Gina Sacks, his daughter, wrote, quoted instructions from my book. The title of the introduction is, we ask not because we doubt, but because we believe. We believe there are answers. So we can trust Torah, that we can ask the most hard questions and not be afraid. You don't have to be afraid because Torah will have answers and we can respond to it into interaction with the world.
Yeah, and I think his last written legacy as chief rabbi was a Judaism engaged with the world. He was worried that we were becoming too provincial, that we were disengaging from the world and sort of, circling the wagons and wanted to push us out, integrate with the world. you've written down some legacy points for
Yeah.
Sacks.
But by the way, I think that's a
Love
double.
to share
That,
that.
that was a double issue because in 2013, when he stands down as chief rabbi and there's this huge party, we expect him to go calm down, and he
Yeah.
publishes a booklet
Yes.
of what I'm going to do next. And not only is then as an older man, he's re-engaging and he's encouraging us to engage with the world. But absolutely.
Yeah.
No, but I thought, if I had to say what was the legacy, and you can't sum up. Can someone summarize me or you in a line or sentence?
No.
I'd be offended.
Yeah.
But important things, and two of them are about his approach and three about the content. So one is nuanced thinking. Too often we're simplistic or uneducated when we look at issues, and he always encouraged a nuanced response. So someone says it must be this, I go, is it completely clear? Just this week I was discussing about how friendly Islam was to Judaism, to Jews during the Middle Ages compared to Christianity, and the assumption is that the Muslims are more understanding in some ways. But it's more complicated. So learn more. He always wanted to know everything on a subject.
Yes,
when he was writing the Yahrtzeit, he wanted books, say, on Kohelet. We'd get the cab would arrive for the library, and he said, put all the books on Kohelet in the cab.
Right.
They'd go away for a couple of weeks, come back, read, and then he'd read everything on the subject.
Yeah, and that was actually, if you paid attention, I think you probably, I'm older than you. I remember when he lived, and it was the rabbi of Dunson Road Shul, and then later the rabbi of Marble Arch, and I had the pleasure of teaching there many Shabbatot and holidays. So just seeing him interact with congregants and seeing him give drashot. But I remember visiting him in Golders Green in the shed, in the garage, the shed in the back where he had his desk, and it just was piles and piles of books. And then you'd go sometime not too long in the future, and there'd be new piles of books on new subjects, and they were always the year, the copyright years. He wanted to know of the moment.
Right. And my reading list was whatever he was carrying with him.
Yeah.
So I think so nuanced thinking was key. Another one as well, respectful conversation. We don't have conversation between different groups. Orthodoxy and progressive, Israel and diaspora, Jew and non-Jew, just conversations in a wider sense we don't have. And you've got to be careful if someone doesn't really want to have a conversation with you and they just want to score points, then you can't. But if there's a possibility of respectful conversation, to always try and find it. Always try and find it. So those are the two. And the last three are engagement with the world, as you mentioned as well, beyond our Judaism, and passion for God, which grew more and more and is on his tombstone, Sama Nafshi. This passion, bring God in the room and talk about God in very intimate ways. And finally, take responsibility. I would argue as a philosopher, Jewish responsibility is probably his approach. And he responded to the issues of the time. The books were so often dignity of difference,
morality,
because of 9/11, right? Or the Great Partnership because of the New Atheists. He's responding to the issues of the day and reapplying his philosophy in different contexts. So taking responsibility and engaging with the world on a practical level is something that I think.
So let's go to your fourth point, if you don't mind repeating it.
So passion for God.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that in relation to music. Music was very, very important to Rabbi Sacks, and I think that's where there's something ethereal about it that transcended the written word, that transcended the sort of intellectual. I think a lot of people didn't realize that because they saw him as an intellectual, because he is an intellectual, he was an intellectual, but really seeing that other side of him through music, watching him sing or listen and appreciate a piece of music, you knew that there's something else going on that just sort of me'al, that was above those things.
I think it's when you research, and I think Einstein wrote about this, there's two stages. There's the wide possibilities you're studying to find out all different issues, and then you hone it down into what you want to say. But many people don't. They just go, what am I going to say? They don't do the creative wide stage. And that creative wide stage, which Einstein talks about, is magical and musical and mysterious, where anything could be relevant and useful. And a true thinker is open to all those possibilities. And music, I think it's his Hasidic soul. The Chabad people I've spoken to don't try and say he was a Chabadnik. They're very respectful. They say he part of him was Chabad, and he moved beyond that, but he's definitely got that
Oh,
aspect
the
to it.
influence, yes.
Right. And I was just interviewing Dr. Michal Biton, and she said he loved the Sephardim as well,
Yeah,
because they had that sense of music and joy.
yeah. He did bring so many communities together. I want to go back to that experience of, learning from him, and you as a thinker in your own right, as a rabbi, as an academic, when you say this is the part of him that lives still in me, what would that be?
So I met him every 6 weeks for about 10 years in terms of the leadership of the college. So we discussed Torah, and I would always go and read the books first, and if I had a question, I would ask. But what I gained from him was how to manage leadership, how to translate Torah into living, when to do things. He would say sometimes, yes, you're right, but now's not the right time. And that's like, because for me, it was like, well, it's right, I should do it. Because just because it's right doesn't mean you should do it. And a sense of appreciation. So we were doing a conference on Maimonides, and I researched and found the actual cherem that the French Bedin,
The excommunication document
that they put Maimonides in. I was like, I found it, right? I want to put that as part of the poster. He goes, great research, really good. That doesn't belong on a poster.
Right.
Maimonides should inspire. Once they're there, you can critique. And he focused me, and sometimes, and I've said this many times, that I would be upset about a particular religious leader and say things that I shouldn't say. And he would pause and say, dignity, Raphael, always have dignity. And I met many ultra or more right-wing Jews who would say, I didn't agree with everything your chief rabbi said, but he was never rude. He was respectful, and that goes a long way, and so we respected him. And you can do that. And it doesn't mean you can't be critical. Some people think, I've always got to be nice, I never say anything with it. You can be critical, but always respectful. And that dignity of respect of how to handle yourself and how to be in the world is what I watched and learned from him. We talk about, I think the Gemara in Brachot talks about that Elisha learned from Eliyahu, not just what he said, but how he washed his hands. And that's an important lesson of how to be.
No, I appreciate that. I think he had a certain capacity for wonder, and when he saw another human being, we make a bracha, mishanet abriot, right? That you see someone who is different from you, or some creation that's different from you, and instead of saying this is so different, move it away, this is so different, make a blessing on it. Just sort of, you see someone who thinks differently than you, there's a curiosity. That's why I didn't think he had a sense, this agelessness about him, because his mind was so vivacious and with that childlike wonder. So he never aged. And I think that was also part of why the death was so hard, because you just thought his energy would last forever.
But then I think he's still alive. That's the point. Person lives in that way. One example of what you're saying, he went to a school which was funded by the Wall Foundation, and he went to the new Bet Midrash and he sat with the children. And the supporters of what he did was so clever. He said, he told them about who this family was, and he said, they never had children. You're their children. And so he's inspiring the children about this couple, inspiring, so it's appropriate why it's named after, and everyone felt this glow of value and meaning. And he would sit on the floor with the children. And the Sacks school that was named after him, he loved talking to them because they weren't afraid. And my daughter's bar mitzvah, my younger daughter, she had lots of questions. She said, no one's got any answers. And I said, well, you can speak to some rabbis. And she went to speak to Rabbi Sacks, and he came down, without his jacket and formal, and said, okay, what are your questions, Sapira? And they just engaged. And you could see he was relaxed, and she's got that memory, that connection to him, which was very good. And many people have those minutes they had with him.
Minutes.
And that's special.
I don't know if you have this, but I certainly experience this, I would say almost daily. Someone contacts me, a call or an email or a text. I was thinking of Rabbi Sacks today, or Rabbi Sacks, he called me once about something, or he wished me a refuah shlema, like you should feel better. And they're holding on to that. They're holding on to, and then it makes me feel what a gift that I had to study with him for several years. And then when he'd come to the States and see him and follow him and go to his lectures and in that sense that he's still with both of us in a very real way. When I was offered to, I was in Jerusalem when President Ari Berman of Yeshiva University, where run the Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks-Herenstein Center
So,
here.
so glad you're doing it.
Here.
As someone who knew him, so I'm so glad you're doing it.
And when he asked me, and he mentioned that there'd be a center on Rabbi Sacks, it was an instant yes. It was a hineni, because I think since he died, I felt, how can I properly capture and memorialize? I've been blessed to have many wonderful, wonderful scholars and teachers in my life. And many of them here at Yeshiva University, where I was an undergraduate. There was something singular about him.
But I think it's a very special thing that you've done, because you published many books, you're a teacher yourself, and many wouldn't do that. They'd say, I've got to build my career, it's about me.
Yeah.
Like, no, I can do my stuff and I can develop and also do this, and the two go together, and that's what he would want.
That's what he would want. I think that's something important to stress, is that I think he invested in people because he believed, now you go out and you do your teaching, but certainly since his death, the sense that can we carry the memory and the legacy, and when we induct a new group of undergraduates or the Sacks scholars, our graduate students, it's amazing to me how we have non-Jewish graduate students in our professional schools at YU, and they read Rabbi Sacks for the first time, and a world opens to them about religion and morality.
It's wonderful to watch people read it for the first time. But also, he talks so much about always giving a kind word to someone. So when he passed away, anyone he'd ever mentioned them to me on something, I phoned and told them. He told me about you. He loved you very much, because I just knew it was important that they should. It wasn't we all felt our own. I was like, no, it's about the community. He had told me him. I was like, he talked to me about you. He cared about you very much. I wanted to share that, because no one owns him. He's part of all of us. And that's the thing.
So just a closing question, because we said we would do 30 minutes, although we could be here all day, really, and maybe for many days in a row. Raphael, when you think about a piece of advice that you'd ask him now about your life or your teaching or your writing, because you've so lived in his shadow, and really he'd be so proud of you.
I don't know. It's all different qualities. It's a complex worldview, and taking it seriously requires work. And that's what I learned from him. Put the work in.
But that's a piece of advice that you've gone from. But if you could ask him today.
Oh, what I would ask him?
Yeah.
So, I don't want to say, what about with Israel? What about with this? We are confined to our time. That was the story of Rabbi Akiva. Right? He's like, I think he would say, my time is done now. You have to work it out. Take the tools.
That's true.
He has now become a letter in the scroll. He's that letter as part of all the others, and our job is to see that. What about you?
He's more than a scroll for me. He's kind of the scroll. Like, in a certain way, I think when you have great teachers, they're like a Torah for you.
Right. Well, I'll say it maybe slightly different. It's this week's Seder as well. And I was just at the Sotheby's this week looking at this Sassoon collection, which Sacks actually saw. And there's a Yemenite, which I'm half Yemenite, a Sefer Torah, and they've got the wonderful, unusual letters, the curly pages. So there's unusual letters in the scroll.
Yes.
And in this week's Seder, there's one, the small cuff of Liv Kotah. So I was looking this morning, is there Torah that I can relate to? And the Ketava Kabbalah writes, normally, because it says that he eulogized, Abraham eulogized for Sarah, and then he cried. And he said, normally we cry, the family cries, and then to spread the word who this person was, we eulogize. But when a tzaddik dies, then immediately there's eulogies, right? About who they were so important. And then not just the family cries, but everybody cries. And that small cuff, he said, is that lesson. And that's this week's Seder. So for me, Rabbi Sacks is the cuff in Liv Kotah, that letter in the scroll for this week.
Beautiful. I will say as we close, first of all, thank you, Rafi. It's been really so special to mark this day and to not be alone in marking this day with someone who was a student. But I think to myself, had I realized just how sick he was, I would have written a letter that I should have written earlier to just say how what an influence he was on me, how much I internalized what it meant to take responsibility for the Jewish people because of him. So just as our listeners are here and thinking about what a Yahrtzeit is, don't wait. If you've had a teacher, if you've read a book, someone who's influenced you and continues to influence you, let them know.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you lose them too
Remember
early.
the award that year with Daniel Gordis, that was his story. He said Rabbi Sacks, when I'd write an article, never knew we would contact and say, great article.
Yeah.
So if he could do it, then we should read a good book. People always love to hear, as authors,
Yes,
right?
yes,
We
yes,
always love to
yes.
share. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But being able to, write someone and say thank you, I think as just a small act of it, to honor him and to honor his legacy is to honor the people we still have while they're alive. Thank you so much for joining us today on the fourth Yahrtzeit of Rabbi Sacks. May his teachings, may his writings, may his worldview continue and blossom and grow.
And move us to read and to do and to act.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.